Hey Emma,
Yes, Malin.
what do you call it when a Marvel superhero, generally known for archery, gets turned into a goose?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Honkai. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your named after a date host, Madelyn.
I'm your same name over and over again, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This fine August day, we're talking about the Silver Case and Honkai Star Rail.
Remember 2 weeks ago when you were like, everybody, it's a fact that everybody LOLs at my jokes?
Yeah?
I'm just thinking about it, that's all.
Why? Because we had to pause for 5 minutes so you laughed at that joke
Oh, yeah.
that I made?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's probably why. I thought about doing something like, like silver medal with the silver case, like the second best. But that didn't even feel like a joke. That just felt like dumb. Honkai. That felt like a joke.
Yeah.
Just imagine him as like an archer goose.
Very funny.
Very funny.
Put that on the Jeremy Renner app.
You know what's not funny, though? Serial murders.
True. Yeah. That's right.
So let's talk about the silver case. Did you listen to our podcast on mystery games last week, listener? Then you're probably primed for the silver case. Not that we talked about it at all in that episode.
Is this a mystery game, or is this just what is your take? Is this a mystery game, or is this just a mystery, like, visual novel story?
I don't want to wade into our visual novels game.
Yeah, that's not really what I'm saying. It's like, is this a mystery?
Not.
In our definition from last week, is this a mystery game?
Probably not. It's probably not interactive enough.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking, too.
But if it were more interactive, it would be, right?
Sure.
It's definitely a mystery. Anyway, The Silver Case is an mysterious adventure visual novel from Grasshopper Manufacture, released for the PlayStation in 1999, Japan only.
Yes.
Only came to the West with the remaster, which released on various systems in like 2016 to 2021.
Yep. It's Grasshopper Manufacture's first video game, I believe.
It is, yes. Their first video game wherein they had no money.
Yes.
Basically everything about the game is a result of them having no money.
Yeah, I was reading a lot of, like, when the remake was coming out in the West. There are a lot of interviews. It's a Suda51 game. We talked about No More Heroes before, which is probably what Suda51 is best known for in, like, the mainstream video game market, because that's his modern series, I guess. But it was interesting, a lot of them, like, he repeated the thing that, like, it's like looking back, at some game that Goichi Suda made, before I was Suda51.
Interesting.
Which that hadn't really clicked with me where Suda51 came from, but now I understand.
I only got it when an article expressly explained it to me, so...
Oh dear.
It's clever. Very clever. The exact kind of clever wordplay that made them scared of translating this into English for 20 years.
Yeah. Can't believe you took one semester off of Japanese and now you've lost it.
Yes, that's correct. I no longer even know the numbers. No, I'm just stupid. I didn't put it together. It's just that I'm stupid. It's not that I've forgotten all of my Japanese. I'm just dumb.
Right.
I understood sort of anyway, the Japanese title that it had before it was the Silver Case. So, I got that at least.
Yeah. Well, like you said, the Western release only just recently with quotation marks, came out. The original is 1999 for PlayStation. There was a port in development for the Nintendo DS that was also supposed to be localized, but it never actually came out because it wasn't turning out well, apparently.
Yeah, they felt if it was going to be on the DS, they were going to have to actually make real significant changes.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't the right moment.
Yeah. The silver case has got, sort of an interesting style to it. It's a visual novel, but when they were making it, they did not really have a lot of artists working at Grasshopper Manufacture. Yeah. So some of it was just troubleshooting, like, okay, but, we still have to make this look interesting. And so they ended up going more with a lot of, I can't remember what it's called, like film screen is what they called it.
Film window.
Film window. Which is, it's like motion graphics, basically, as they had someone on staff who was, like, good at motion graphics. And so essentially, like, there's lots of different elements that pop up in screen, like from 3D backgrounds you can interact with, to character portraits, to lines of text dialogue. And these are, like, sort of always moving around the screen, alongside, like, moving sort of backgrounds behind each of these screens to sort of give it a more, dynamic look, even though they didn't have, like, the resources to be making, like, something that looked more traditional, right? Because they wanted to avoid doing, like, drawn backgrounds, I think was one of the main things, because they're like, our two artists can't do this. Don't have time to do this.
So in this game, it's set in 1999 Alt Universe Japan in the 24 districts. Mm-hmm. The 24 districts turns up, and this sort of like Alt Universe Japan turns up in several Grasshopper Manufacture games. So this is kind of like many of those games are like secret spin-offs of the Silver Case that came to the West first.
Yeah, so there's this whole, we might have talked about this in No More Heroes, but there is this whole, like, concept that I really could not figure out whether it comes from Suda51 himself or if it's just, like, a fan sort of thing that's been put together. I felt like there should have been an easy answer to that, but I could not figure it out. But anyway, there's some of his body of work is referred to, at least by fans, as the Kill the Past series, with Silver Case being the first sort of created one in the series, although sometimes they put in his previous game before Grasshopper Manufacture, which is Moonlight Syndrome, which is also like a murder mystery case. So sometimes that's referred to as the first one, and then it goes through to his most recent game, which is No More Heroes 3. There's like a graphic, there's like sort of like 3 timeline things that then sort of coalesce in Travis Strikes Back. I was reading an interview though on Inverse, and he talked about that something he thinks about when doing this is Tezuka's, what is called Star System, which is essentially, Tezuka is a really prolific manga writer, right? Made a lot of classic things. But if you go through his work, you'll see characters, designs, and names appear within many of his works, but they aren't the same character, right? They're a villain in this one, they're a supporting character in this one, he's just reusing that character throughout his work. So I don't know really whether there's an intention in Kill the Past for it to actually be like a multiverse in the way that we get those today, or if that's like a modern fan, like just like theory crafting the way that fandom interacts with games now, sort of thing.
Especially given that it started as we don't have enough artists, it feels like it could be either way.
Well, that doesn't really have anything to do with it, but for what it's worth, the Silver Case is followed by, what is it, Flower, Sun, and Rain, and then the 25th Ward are actual sequels that are referred to as such. I just don't know if then, like, the Killer 7 and No More Heroes stuff is, like, yeah, like, put the pieces together fans, or just, like, fun, thematic. If Suda 51 just likes themes, you know? Like, just likes things.
It's definitely that. It's just a matter of if it's more than that.
Yeah.
So in this game, there's two storylines in the Silver Case. One of them is called Transmitter, where you play as sort of a rookie detective in the Heinous Crimes Unit, which cannot be what it's called anywhere.
No, well, no, that's not a real.
I know. I just thought it was. I just thought it was funny. It's funny, and it's the kind of funny thing that it's like, oh, that's like 98% that's intentional. I hope it's not just a terrible translation. But the Heinous Crimes Unit, and you're investigating. There've been a string of murders that seem to be linked to a supposedly like dead serial killer named Kamui, who had assassinated a bunch of government guys 20 years before in the Silver Case, and was captured and held in an asylum, and they determined he wouldn't commit a crime again. But what's happening now?
Yeah.
And then there's also the placebo scenario, where you play as a journalist who's kind of covering this investigation and uncovering more information about Kamui. So two kind of parallel storylines.
Yeah, it seems to be like the detective storyline, the Transmitter, is like you're sort of experiencing the events, you know, as they happen for a character that was there or characters that were there. And then the placebo one is like, okay, so this is what happened, player.
Yeah.
Because the Transmitter one is a lot of you, like, pursuing the case alongside your terrible coworkers. And the placebo one is a lot of reading, like, Tokyo's memos and writings and stuff on the case itself that sort of lay it all out more in a text-based format. It becomes more and more text-heavy as it goes on, as they were like, oh boy, we're running out of resources here.
Tokyo is the journalist
yes.
in that side of the thing.
Yeah. I don't think the detective has, like, an official name, but is commonly called Akira by people.
But you get to name him, so
yeah.
He's called McCanus, probably.
Probably.
If I were to play.
Yeah.
This is notable, like, if you're familiar with Grasshopper Manufacturers, where if you're familiar with No More Heroes and Killer 7 and stuff, this is much less bloody.
Yeah.
Right? Very much, like, sort of that aesthetic becoming what it is. They specifically avoided a lot of that stuff being shown graphically in this game to avoid any issues with censors.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. There had been, like, a really awful serial killing case in Japan around when Suda was making the Moonlight Syndrome one, where apparently, it was the serial killer had cut people's heads off, and Moonlight Syndrome was originally about someone who was cutting people's heads off, so they actually had to change things in order to release it, because there was a lot of regulations around that time on all forms of media. And so he says, like, that got him, sort of interested in writing something about a serial killer, but then there was less problems with this because it wasn't as directly like, oh, oops, it's the same. But still, they had to be, like, careful. That being said, the basic aesthetic of it is something that feels similar to his later games, even as they transitioned into more 3D.
The content of it, for sure. I just think that some of what those games are very known for is being very bloody.
Yeah.
Right? Dramatically bloody. Tarantino as an obvious influence.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And so if you're thinking like, man, a lost Suda 51 game, know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah.
A lot of reviews say it's very hard to follow. So,
yes.
Probably intentionally so, but, consider yourself warned.
Yeah.
They did, I mean, as we mentioned, they did, one of the reasons that it didn't get a Western release for almost 20 years is that, I mean, it's a very text-based game with some puzzle elements. And so, as can sometimes be the case with kind of like puzzly word-based games, translating them is really hard. This one in the era where it was even just like, oh, translating this amount of text is really hard as a video game localization project, let alone there being a puzzle that's like, how do these numbers interact with in code interact with Japanese language, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of like very culturally specific word puzzles that would just not make any sense if you one-to-one translated them the way that you probably would have for a 1999 game.
There's also like the element of when things were games that were very like, it's set in alternate Japan, but set in Japan, it's very culturally like about Japan. We're not like prime targets for localization.
Yeah.
Because there was less popularity there, I guess, in terms of like people watching more anime, reading more manga, playing more games from Japan, and having some sort of the setting things in a foreign country. Americans can't understand that,
Well, it's important to remember that Tokyo wasn't introduced to the West
until Persona 5
Persona 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Glad you knew where I was going with that.
But the translator for the remake is James Mountain, and said that he was chosen because he's able to translate the difficult Japanese into English, and also that he had lived in Japan during 1999, and felt like he could then translate the actual time and place of having experienced it in his own life.
They must have felt very lucky to be like, oh, we've got someone with the right cultural baggage.
Yeah.
I thought this was relevant to our discussion last week, that Suda said that this team, we talked a bit last week about where did mystery game, and this is not quite a mystery game, right? But where did people making mystery stories for their games start? Right? What was their beginning of the crafting? And Suda in an interview said that the team created the setting and social structure first, and then the crime, and then like the scenario, and then the characters.
That makes sense. We didn't really talk about setting a lot last week, but there was some. Everybody talked about like, as long as you are establishing your rules within your universe and then adhere to those rules, or the mystery is when one of those rules is broken, people can accept that and you can write a mystery around it. So having a good understanding of your setting, if you're not setting it in like the real world, is definitely important for a mystery.
Yeah. The reviews of this game were a little hard for me to parse. So many of them were like, it's impossible to follow, but there are great moments.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what does that mean?
It's about the vibes, I guess.
Can a visual novel really be about the vibes?
Oh, sure. Yeah. A book can be about the vibes.
I know. I just feel like can a mystery story really be about the vibes?
Yeah, I think so. I found that there's a lot of just polarity of the reviews between people who just were, getting it, I guess, and people who weren't getting it. And this isn't like you don't have to get everything. Sometimes you just don't get things. But there's a big disparity in the reviews of whether it was very low for the re-release or very high. Which might also just have to do with whether the reviewer is particularly familiar with like later body of work. It certainly is, if you're really interested in Suda 51 and Grasshopper Manufacture, definitely a curiosity, right? At least to see how things developed from there.
Well, it's definitely a funky setup. I mean, obviously all of this kind of like, they developed an engine so that they didn't have to draw things. Stuff is kind of silly. But it's definitely a really interesting presentation and interesting aesthetic. for this kind of story that made me feel like, oh, this is interesting, until I read all these reviews that were like, you can't follow anything. And I'm like, oh man, that's lame.
For me, see, that got me more interested. I love when I can't follow things. Personally. I mean this sincerely.
You're just like, turn my brain off.
It's not even turn my brain off. It's just like coast feeling it, you know?
Swimming in the vibes.
Yeah. I think I've turned my brain off of like things that are stupid, which I wouldn't necessarily say just because you can't follow it, it's stupid.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a different feeling for me personally, I guess.
That's fair.
Just because the story logic doesn't make sense or is hard to follow doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing to think about, I guess is what I would say. Again, totally I haven't played this yet. It's one of those games that I was like, oh, this is interesting, and I stuck it in my Switch wish list, and one day I will have space in my backlog.
It's $40 on Switch.
It's 2 games, though. It's both the Silver Case and the 25th Ward packaged together.
Okay. I hate when they do that on Switch, though.
Why? Because
if it's gonna be too... Like, I want to know that I'm gonna like it.
I guess, sure, yeah. Fair enough.
I realize I'm the hypocrite who bought all 4 Trine games at once. But I bought all 4 of those at once because they were like $15 altogether. They were cheaper to buy all at once on PlayStation than they were to buy one.
Were those on sale Switch. When you bought them, though?
I don't know. They might have been. They probably were.
Wait for a sale, then.
I guess so. Now, all of this spooky mystery game week, I'm like, oh, time for some mystery. It's time to break out that Ace Attorney. This is nothing like Ace Attorney. Don't hear me say that and think, Ace Attorney, wrong, false.
What do you mean spooky mystery week, Madelyn? It's been several weeks, actually.
No, it's only been a week since we talked about it. We did the mystery games episode last week.
Sure.
So this mystery games week.
Okay.
It would be weird if I said this mystery game's 48 hours. Like that would be a weird thing to say.
That'd be a mysterious thing to say, for sure.
That some podcasts have not been recorded on Sundays at noon or Sundays at 6 p.m.
And that's breaking the rules of our setting, you know?
That's correct. Yeah. You have to follow the rules of the setting, and only sneaky sleuths will be able to determine, from background noise probably, that I am not in Spain recording this episode. Or am I?
You can't literally hear... What would they hear in the background? Just people speaking Spanish?
Or they might hear in the background some noise from outside of my apartment that I have been worried that the microphone is picking up, and I'm glad that it's not. That would determine that I am at Talk This NYC HQ, but who could say? You'd have to watch all of the little video screens that pop up on the podcast special edition to determine that for sure. Yeah.
I will say, I might, with the Metal Gear Solid collections coming out, I might become a Metal Gear Solid girly. But this, Kill the Past thing is another one where I feel like I just was a Kingdom Hearts girly, you know? Some people are Kill the Past girlies. Some people are Metal Gear Solid girlies. And these are the roots you choose as a human being.
You're really embracing the Gen Z slang here.
What, girly?
I feel like girly is a very Gen Z thing. Do you think girly... I feel like girly... Not to get too sidetracked here, but I'm thinking of Kill the Past girly as a genre of human.
Very metal, to be honest. To call yourself.
But I'm like, most Kill the Past girlies must not be girls, right?
I bet there are girls.
I'm not saying that there aren't any girls.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, given the era that some of those games came out in and their content, not to be too, to throw back to last week, we have to make games for girls, Nancy Drew, or anything like that.
Right.
But I feel like it's probably not a stretch to say that probably more than 50% of Kill the Past girlies are, in fact, not girls. And do you think that girly will transcend gender the way that,
dude has?
I
think it
mostly
should. Obviously, there are some people who do not like being called dude for various reasons. And there'll probably be people who will not be like to be called girly. But I do think it should become dude. Where doesn't necessarily have to be gendered.
Well, I'll cheer for that non-toxic future for us.
Speaking of girlies, I guess.
Yeah.
Shall
Space girlies.
Shall we talk about Honkai Star Rail?
Absolutely. For you all y'all gambling space girlies, here we go.
Yeah, the gambling girlies. Finally. It's your time.
Honkai Star Rail. It's a role-playing, turn-based gacha game from MiHoYo, probably best known for Genshin Impact. Although the Honkai series predates Genshin Impact, Genshin Impact is ostensibly kind of a spin-off of the Honkai series.
Honkai Star Rail itself is ostensibly kind of a spin-off of the Honkai series. So
that's true. Oh, it's so hard for me to keep saying Honkai because I'm thinking of Hawkeye and it's just being Honkai the whole time. So just enjoy the goose thoughts for yourself. Untitled Honkai game. It came out in April for PC and mobile. PS5 coming before the end of the year.
yes.
It was first announced in 2021, and they had more than 10 million people pre-registered before it launched. So the power of Genshin.
Very much so. Speaking of the star system thing where you take characters and just stick them wherever you want, there are in Honkai returning characters, but who are not the same version of those characters from previous. I think Honkai Impact is the main series of Honkai. So they may look like them, but they are not, in fact, that same character. With like one exception, apparently.
Just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
In case you were wondering, a Honkai is like a bad thing, basically.
Okay.
It's like an alien force, an outside force that wants to cause chaos and absorb space civilizations, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
So sometimes those are zombies. In this game, I think the Honkai is what are they called? The Stellaron.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's the common. These games don't have a lot in common, frankly, other than some of these characters. But the Honkai is like, there's a bad outside thing.
Got it.
The original games are called Honkai Gakuen, by the way. And I couldn't quite figure out what this was, but they had to, like, change the name for some reason. For, like, rights reasons.
Interesting.
But I couldn't figure out what that was. So I thought that was weird. I was like, why is this called the Honkai series when half of the games are not spelled that way? Anyway, in this game, you are a space person with amnesia. You wake up like on a space train,
yes,
space station,
the Astral Express.
The Astral Express. You got no memory other than that someone named Kafka has helped you wake up, basically. And you've got in you one of these Stellarons, which is just like space bad thing. And on this train, you meet the Trailblazers, who are like space adventurers, basically, and you join with them to travel from world to world, doing some fun, good stuff.
Yes.
And your main friends, are named Dan Hang and March 7th.
Yeah. Some really good names overall in Honkai Star Rail. It's been my impression.
Why do you think they picked March 7th in particular?
You know, I don't know. Maybe there's a lawyer reason. Maybe there will be.
See, I thought you said a lawyer reason.
Maybe there's a lawyer reason. Someone ordered her, and they sued her, and their punishment was, you must be named March 7th.
Maybe they were like, originally they wanted to be September 21st. And they were like, no. Earth, Wind, and Fire's already got that one.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, shoot, now I do remember.
Yeah.
The 21st night of... Anyway, they switched to March 7th. No, this is all made up. March 7th, just a weird name.
I listened to both, like, an introduction of, like, how you play this, which I should have picked a different one because this one was, like, for Genshin, like, people moving from Genshin to this, like, here's how to explain it. And I, unfortunately, do not know how anything works in Genshin either. So I was just listening to a lot of terms where I didn't know what either of them meant and didn't really pick up on what was happening.
There are sure a lot of things to grind.
Yep. Although apparently it is actually, one thing I did pick up, it is less grind heavy than Genshin. So like the way that your dailies work is there's a whole bunch of dailies to pick from, and you can go up to like 50 points, but you can pick whichever one you want to do each day, as opposed to Genshin where it seems like you have to just do all of them, even if there's stuff that you just don't feel like doing that day. Right, so it's a little bit user-friendlier in that regard if you're playing on like a free-to-play thing and are trying to get your stuff every day.
Fair enough. Still grindy. And important to remember that this game is in very early days for these kinds of games still.
Yes.
It came out just a couple of months ago, and so pretty much all of the reviews are from the perspective of like, here's what's good about it so far. But also, Genshin definitely, I feel like the reviews of Genshin have in most ways trended sort of more positive over time, in a lot of ways, at least in story stuff. So a lot of the stuff so far is like, oh, the story is like kind of lighter than Genshin so far. It's like, okay, I don't think Genshin was as heavy as Genshin is now in the first 2 months.
I read that in some of the reviews too, actually, of there's a lot of just sort of messing about. And I actually read a review that's like, this seems to get to the point a lot quicker.
It's also different from Genshin in that, like we said, it's turn-based. Very quick turn-based, speedy turn-based, snappy turn-based from everything that I read. But turn-based, which seems to have been somewhat controversial amongst pre-release audience, at least. People have strong feelings about turn-based games. But that being said, like, if you have a game where your first arc is like, you've got people living on 2 discs and there's a rich disc and a poor disc, can it be anything but a turn-based game? No, it's Final Fantasy VII.
That's true. You're right. I will say that, like, you know, I probably will not get into any of these games ever, but in terms of, like, if you're like Emma, you must pick a popular gacha game to get into right now. Like, everything about Honkai Star Rail, to me, is, like, leagues more interesting than anything I've ever seen about Genshin. It just seems a little lighter. I like the setting more. The turn-based combat seems appealing to me. So, for what it's worth, in this one podcaster's opinion, the first impression of Honkai Star Rail is a lot more positive for me than Genshin has been.
That's not surprising, though, because Genshin is Breath of the Wild, right? Which is not really your thing.
It's ish.
I mean, I know it's not really, that was half facetious, but still, in like a first impression way, it's much less of a type of game that would be your thing. But you do, you know, it is important to mention, this is a gacha game, right? And gacha games are, like, probably bad.
Yeah.
Probably bad. You know, like Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail is, like, not as predatory as it could be. You certainly can play both of these games free to play, and, you know, your mileage may vary on if you feel like you hit a paywall at some point, but, like, that's probably more of a personal thing about the amount of time that you want to spend grinding and just how fast you want to progress in a game, more so than it is like a hard-coded, like, after level 15, you're absolutely going to have to spend money to keep up kind of thing.
The reviews I read, again, were pretty, like, in comparison to Genshin, were saying that this is even, like, you know, it's a step even further away from feeling predatory, for a few different reasons. They said the free characters that you get are actually pretty good. In Genshin, that's not necessarily true. But like the automatic characters you get over the course of the story, you can probably continue to use those characters throughout what's out right now and be fine with just a little bit of grinding. After you make a certain number of polls, it's a lot, but after you make a certain number, they let you select whichever 5-star you want to pull then. Like, so if there's like a basic 5-star that you've been trying to get, you can then just pick it then, as opposed to continuing to having to pull for them forever ad nauseum. So there's that. Yeah, I think those are, and the dailies things. It seems like it's a little bit easier to grind out whatever you need in Honkai as well. But those are all like qualifiers. I do think at the end of the day that, like, if Honkai wasn't gacha, I would be like, yeah, okay. Like, yes, I'll play this. Seems awesome. But that is actually a barrier that's keeping me away from it, interestingly.
It's difficult though, right? I mean, I'm not gonna come out and be like a defender of gacha games, but I feel like whenever there's like comments about this, people are like, well, just set a price for it. Like, just set a price for it. It's like, how long has Genshin Impact been running now?
Yeah.
With, like,
that's perfectly fair.
Like, with very regular patches, with like huge content updates. I do feel like the people who are, and this is not, I'm not saying you're saying this, but I do feel like some of the commentariat of like, well, just set a price for it and let me play the game without the gacha is kind of naive. For a game that is structured in this release method, is set to be this long running of an experience and have the amount of content that these games have, I just feel like it's disingenuous to be like, well, just charge me $60 for it.
Yeah.
Because like $60 is not you know, I like you saw plenty of reviews that were like, well, this game is really structured for the low spend. Like, it's fine for the low spend gacha player, the person who is fine spending like a subscription fee a month, basically, to do it. And I guess you could do it that way, but that doesn't seem great either.
I mean, you know, it'd be interesting to see them try to do a more subscription-based model. There's still, like, Final Fantasy XIV.
That's true.
That's how that works. And seems to be doing very well for itself, for what it is. And I mean, like, they do have, you get, like, monthly passes in Honkai and Genshin that give you stuff when you basically subscribe to it. So there is some sort of system there that's familiar to that. But yeah. It's a little... It would be nice to live in a world where we could make games and not have to worry about the profits that those games are pulling in. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Because obviously, like, this is what MiHoYo does. And because their games are primarily mobile games, right? And that's a consequence, and consequence is a little bit too strong of a word there, right? But that's a consequence of them being a Chinese studio, where the mobile game market is, the mobile game market is enormous everywhere, but where the mobile game market is enormous. And so, because they're going to be making mobile games, this is just the way that this is just what they're going to do. You always do wonder, like, okay, what percentage of this comes from the whales, right?
Yeah.
If they switched this to something where everybody had to pay $10 a month, how much of a revenue decline would they take on that? I wish we could a peek behind the curtain on that, because that would be fascinating.
I mean, I think the way that like MMORPGs do it is you pay a monthly fee, and also you pay an upfront cost for any expansions. Is how I believe it works. So you could do it like that too, I guess.
It's just fascinating. It's hard. It's a hard economic model to have these like very long running, but story-based systems. And it is sort of unfortunate that we settle on gacha as the way that must happen.
Yeah.
Because of course now part of the problem is all right, well, Genshin's out there and it's free to play, and Honkai Star Rail's out there and it's free to play, and I can at least tell myself, regardless of whether this is true, that I won't overspend on gacha on it, right? And I probably won't. If I'm most people, I probably won't.
Yeah.
But if I'm like someone who's like, yes, I'm gonna make Honkai, my long-running story game about Hawkeye as a goose.
Right.
I have to release it free to play, right? I can't be like, this is gonna be a $10 a month subscription, because I'm never gonna get the player base that I need.
That's true. I mean, it is interesting. We see a lot of companies trying to launch, either like battle things or like MMORPGs, and it is very hard to fit into that space anywhere now.
Yeah.
Because for their MMORPG, everybody has Final Fantasy XIV, and for their free-to-play stuff, everybody has Genshin or Honkai, and for their battle, everybody has Splatoon, I guess. I don't know.
Fortnite.
Yeah,
Apex.
Exactly. So there is only a limited number of room there, as much as game companies and game investors and publishers seem to wish that there was more room.
But it's hard to predict, right? I mean, I guess Genshin is sort of unique in the Western market anyway. But Genshin broke in, right? So many of these games, it feels like, well, you kind of had to start your game like 10 years ago. And maybe if you'd released that game 10 years ago, it would have been Fortnite.
How old is Genshin? 6 years old?
We talked about it as a new game.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
Wow.
During the pandemic. Genshin has, I think, only been around for about 3 years.
It feels like it has been around always. Somehow. An inevitable fact of life, Genshin exists.
Yeah, Genshin is not even 3 years old.
That is insane to me.
I mean, maybe I'm sure it had some kind of a beta before that.
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah.
But released in the end of September 2020.
Wild.
Yeah.
Maybe that helped. You just had to release your game right before everybody was stuck inside forever.
This is 6 months into everyone being stuck inside.
While everybody was stuck inside forever.
Yeah, that probably didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Well, shall we mash?
Yeah?
Okay. So common elements. This is always where I start, then I throw all the actual work to you. Common elements. We've got to have, like, recurring characters.
From what?
Which is hard, because we're creating a standalone game. But that's okay. Characters that will recur in the future iterations. I mean, to be honest, I think a Genshin Impact visual novel would do quite well. But
oh yeah, absolutely.
But I can't just propose that.
I want to keep the train. I love a good space train.
Space train is good. I feel like 2 parallel storylines could be good.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that's interesting.
From the front of the train, back of the train.
Yeah. And more opportunities for, like, character gacha, right? If I have 2 storylines, twice as many 5 stars.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to have them share polls.
Sure. But there would just be more to pull.
Yeah,
from.
Sure. Because there'd be more characters. Yeah.
Or they could have totally separate character sets. Like, that's possible, too. You're right. It couldn't be like, I have to pull March 7th in both of them.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a train. Could be 2 trains on a race. Like a racing train.
Do trains race?
No, but, there's not a space train either, so I don't have to be bound to read. Both of these take place in fantastical universes, so I don't have to be bound to reality.
Sure.
It's kind of tough, right?
I think that we should hide, like, they should be on the same train, but you shouldn't actually know that going into it. That should be like a twist, that actually they're all on the same train. This feels very thematically, like heading towards your inevitable destruction together.
Are they all on the same train at the same time? Or is it like... That could be interesting too, that it's like some things that you think are happening on different trains are actually on the same train, and some things that you think are happening on the same train are, but it's like a week ago.
Yeah. I do think that introducing some narrative confusion is important for bringing the silver case into this, right?
Yeah, it has to be hard to follow, for sure.
Yeah.
And that'll be good. Like, that I think will serve our game. If we're trying to break into, I think this is a free-to-play situation, probably. If we're trying to break into that market, we have to have something that's going to drum up some social media excitement, some buzz, some discourse. And what better than people trying to figure out what the heck is going on?
People love lore crafting.
People love lore crafting.
I feel like the Genshin community is also very into, like, the lore of everything, right?
Yeah.
Do you have a spooky twin in Honkai Star Rail like you do in Genshin?
I don't think so. Not yet.
Soon?
We could pull that. I mean, Genshin is a Honkai game, so we could pull from that.
I like the spooky twin. That's all I really know. I don't really know what the other twin is doing. I'm just aware that the other twin exists in Genshin.
But having twins would be good, because then there could be scenes that were happening where it's like, oh, we didn't know it was the twin.
Yeah. There's, like, not to get into spoilers for the Silver Case and various other games, but there's some clone stuff in Suda 51's oeuvre. So, going with twins, clones, something like that. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that could be great. We've danced around the gameplay elements here.
I feel like you could just have both, sort of.
Yeah.
Like, turn-based combat, and then we bring in some, like, light investigative elements, too.
Sure.
Of being able to, like, be in a space and, like, gather information, I guess.
Yeah, I guess you would have to, like, grind for clues, right?
What does that even mean? How do you... What would be grinding for clues?
You have to bribe someone...
Interesting.
With celestial emeralds or whatever to get the clues, and so you have to grind that out to have enough. I don't know. You could probably think of something more creative than that.
But you know, a full-on gacha, like, detective game would be like, how does that work? But it would be interesting.
It would be highly exploitative. But I think
it's like they have different things that they're good at also, just like in Honkai. In Honkai, you know, there's a bunch of different paths the characters can take where they specialize on, like, a certain job or whatever.
Yeah.
So you could just break up, like, the investigative elements into those different jobs, and different characters could fill those roles, you know, of, like, interrogator, like, looking for clues, like, logicking things, the person that's in charge of the red thread, you know, like...
That'd be pretty dope.
You'd have to think about how you would break these down into more complete roles. I think you could get
spookier with it, though. Like, I think we can, you know, take the Ace Attorney Spirit Medium stuff, you know, like, I think we could give people cool powers. Not just, like, they're the blood spatter analyst.
Oh, sure. It could be, like, you know, supernatural sort of specializing, but still we're bringing them into, like, categories, right?
Yeah, I think everyone could have a special combat move and a special, like, investigatory power, for sure. I feel like this could be cool. But we would need to keep it running. It's taking everything that I said last week was hard about mystery games and being like, but what if you did that for 3 years as a live service model?
Very, lost problem we're creating for ourselves here, for sure.
Yeah.
What's the other one with the Android? Westworld, very Westworld problem we're creating for ourselves.
Yeah, both of those games really... both of those shows... Westworld is sort of about a game. Both of those shows famously well received over time.
Yep, yeah.
Considered to have only improved.
Yes, yeah.
As time went on.
Yeah, creating satisfying answers for all mysteries.
The problem is, for this to work, you'd have to be, like, sure. You have to be like, I have a 5-year plan, and my trail of breadcrumbs is so interesting that people will want to play my game for 5 years.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be, like, and, you know, Honkai is sort of structured like this, too. I guess it has a more overarching story as well, but you stop in different places and have storylines. at the places you stop. So I do think we'd have to do it like case, you know?
Yeah.
It would be like if we wanted to put anything overarching that I think we'd start having.
Well, I hate to say it, but there would have to be something overarching.
Darn.
Otherwise, what's to stop people from just subscribing to the Battle Pass, for one case, and then unsubscribing? They've got to know what happens next.
That's true. But we could just have, like character development. It wouldn't have to be like the mystery at the end.
That's not going to be the next Genshin Impact, Emma. Come on. Think big. Think $1 billion big.
It's hard to think $1 billion big.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I feel like that's pretty good. Listeners, do you think that we have what it takes to craft an ongoing 5-year meta mystery for our detective gacha RPG with twins and clones? How do you feel about gacha games? Is there a way to do them where they aren't predatory? Probably. Just you wouldn't make any money. Have you played the Silver Case, and do you understand what happens in it? Did you understand that Suda51 stands for Suda Go Ichi? If you have thoughts on any of this or anything else that we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. Unless Twitter is not called Twitter anymore now. Unless it's X now, or whatever.
Is that something that's happening right now?
He's saying Twitter's gonna go away.
Good.
Or he was saying that back in July.
Love it.
So, forgive me. I'm still getting used to Elon verse or whatever. But you should also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. And finally, but most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, wherever you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today, subscribe to Talk This. Next week, it is 6 weeks in gaming.
Heck
Can
yeah.
you believe it? 6 weeks have gone by so fast.
It really have.
So we'll have games to talk about, for sure.
Probably.
I probably should take some notes on. I've already almost forgotten finishing Chia, so I should probably take some notes on that.
That'd be good.
Before it's too late. But Emma, what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, for our old game, we'll be talking about Super Mario RPG.
Nice.
And for our new game, we'll be talking about Season Letter to the Future. A letter for the future. A letter to the future. Season. We'll be talking about season.
What? What?
A letter to the future.
I'm going to come in for the wrong game.
There's not two different games. I just couldn't remember.
The future, and I was going to be like, that is the wrong game.
There's only one game. I just couldn't remember what is the word? 2, 4? What part of speech is that?
It's a preposition.
I couldn't remember the preposition.
We'll look forward to prepositions in 2 weeks. Listeners, that's it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Emma, take us out.
This week, I hope that your own life is very chronological and makes sense.